Hey guys, on this episode, we're going to dive into parenting. Is it birth order or is it parenting order? And how to help our kids grow into adults and still like us, why they do it. One of the most profound things I've learned in my life is that it's actually not about my hair at all. I've spent a lifetime trying to cover up who I am. And as much as I love a good external transformation, and I do, I much more love a heart transformation. Join me as I share how I work to heal my heart, find happiness, and embrace our hair. Hey guys, welcome back to It's Not About Your Hair, where we talk, you guessed it, all things hair, heart, and happiness. If you've been hanging around long enough, you know that we talk a little bit about everything on this podcast, and anything really goes. The point of this podcast for me is that I get to share lessons I've learned throughout my life and be able to give you guys, hopefully, a new lens on which to look through, maybe open your eyes a little bit to something you didn't know. And it also gives me an opportunity to share things nobody around me wants me to talk about, which leads us into what this episode is about. And this is about parenting and the different ways that we parent, how our parenting affects our kids, how the way we were parented affects us. And I thought it would be a fun storytelling time to just give you guys a little bit of insight into my children, since Sophie's been on 2 episodes of the podcast, which you guys really liked and were really kind. And I just want to thank you if you tuned into either one of those episodes and sent a message of encouragement, if you commented something kind towards Sophie. You know, we're all on this journey of life, and we're all, whether we admit it or not, unsure exactly where we're headed. And so I think it's extremely awesome that Sophie, my most introverted and shy child, adult person, came on and shared a little bit about what she's struggling with. And then it ended up evolving into how we as a family work together to help each other grow. And then last week, I talked about the idea of finding deeper understanding of yourself based on that podcast episode with Sophie, where we talked about knowing each other better in your family helps you to not put boundaries on people for their growth and giving them opportunities to change. And finding out specifically about your own personality. And I talked about the Enneagram, which I super love, but also just finding your spot in life and giving yourself permission to grow. So yeah, I mean, I'm so grateful for an opportunity like this. I mean, anyone could start a podcast and just ramble on and share. And the fact that you guys are listening, that you're engaged, that it's helping somebody. I mean, that's so darn cool. And we're up to like 570 subscribers, which is just mind blowing to me. 570 people tuning in, maybe, or at least subscribing, which is really awesome. And so this week, let's do it. Let's dive in. I thought I love this conversation at work around parenting. And if you've been a parent long enough, like one day or longer, you know that you've had moments where you feel like you're just sucking at life, that you're ruining your children, and that you just probably shouldn't have been given kids. I mean, I remember leaving the hospital at 19 with Sydney, and I was barely not a baby myself. And they just let us leave with this child. And I remember thinking, this probably isn't a good idea. I mean, definitely don't have enough wherewithal to take care of another person, and let alone me and my 19-year-old counterpart raising a baby. And so that leads me to kind of birth order. And I think about this idea a lot, you guys. You know, there's so many books and studies on birth order and how that makes you or breaks you. But I have a different take on it. What if it's not birth order, it's parenting order? And maybe this pertains a little bit more to me because my kids are farther apart in age and I was so young when I had my first child. Or maybe it is, there's some truth, or maybe it's all of the above. So um, I think that when we have kids, our first child, they say, is usually, the most type A. They don't want to do anything wrong. They tend to be a little bit more perfectionist. And I think that that's because you parent that way with your first child. With Sydney, even though I was a young mom, I think I even more so to this. I didn't want to look like I didn't know what I was doing. So I wanted her to look perfect, for her clothes to be changed probably 700 times a day, and her to look put together and be perfect, because somehow that was a reflection of me as a parent. And that proceeded for quite a long time. And I think, unfortunately, even if you have more kids, your first kid, or if you only have one kid, is it's the guinea. It's the guinea pig. You're everything's the first time you're parenting, the first time you have a toddler, the first time you have a middle schooler, the first time you have an adult kid. And so each one of those is expanding you as a human being. And I think I made mistakes with every one of my children, but I think that I definitely made a few more the first time around, for a couple different reasons, right? Because it was my first time as a parent, but also I hadn't done the work to know myself well enough yet. And so no matter how old you get, some of us don't grow up. I'm going to repeat that. So it doesn't matter how old you get, some of us don't grow up. We're not willing to go into the areas of our lives where we haven't done the work to get healthy physically, spiritually, emotionally. And so if you're emotionally unhealthy, then you're going to show up in really ugly ways. So you're going to show up defensive or argumentative, or you're going to yell a lot as a parent, or you're going to take things personally a lot. Ding, 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 that was mine. Because I've shared a lot in this podcast about my root of feeling unworthy. That showed up in my parenting a lot. If my kids rejected me, which how many of you know, if you have daughters, at some point you're going to be rejected. It's their own way of navigating their life. But I didn't know that. And so I took it personally. And then instead of being able to actively engage my listening when my kid was rejecting me, probably because she was going through something of her own or feeling insecure, I picked up my junk and set it on top of them, like, you're not going to talk to me like that. And not that our kids should be disrespectful to us. That's not what I'm saying. But there's always a reason behind behaviors. And it takes a lot to slow down our reaction to parent with a purpose. And I have not mastered this. Anything I talk about on this podcast, please absolutely know I haven't mastered, nor do I have a goddamn clue what's going on, but I'm learning. And something that I think is probably one of my better qualities, and I don't have very many good qualities, but one of my better qualities is that I'm willing to really talk about the stuff that I struggle with, because I want to be better. I really do. I just want to be better. And I've been working on not making things about me for my whole dang life. But this is a problem that shows up, I think, when you have childhood abandonment issues. You just always have this, no, past tense. I have always had and overcoming this longing to belong somewhere. And so the birth order of your kids, can that cause you to raise different kids? Or is it your health and their health emotionally? Is it the way that different kids show up that creates the birth order, or the personalities, or are they born with them? And the answer is yes. I think it's all of the above. I have a really great therapist who I've been going to for, I want to say 10 years, maybe longer. I don't know. But he's so awesome. And I remember going into his office one time when my oldest was probably 15. And I was crying so hard because I felt like I was just messing up. Because none of us becomes a parent. I do not believe this, that any of us become a parent because we want to be really bad at it and do really incredible damage to our children's mental health. But I seem to be winning at that, and we talked about this last week. I said Sid was an 8 on the Enneagram, but I didn't learn this until she was like out of high school. And her personality is the challenger. And I didn't know that. And because I hadn't done enough work on my healing, when Sydney was upset, she, wanted to argue or fight. And I turned into, just not able to process that and met her aggression, where in her aggression, really, she was saying, can you see me? Can you hear me? And I was always trying to shut that down and rebuting with, can you see me? Can you hear me? And in the process, not allowing space for her to literally just be seen and heard and accept her personality. And so I went into my therapist's office and I was just having a really hard day. And I said, I just don't know how to do this anymore. And I'm like, I feel like all we do is fight. I feel like I'm not winning. And he said two things. Before we start, he said, I want you to know something. And whether he made this up or read it in a book, I don't care. Your kids are going to turn out in spite of you and because of you. That has stuck with me for so long. So he said, you can't take all the credit, but if you can't take all the credit, you can't take all the blame. And I really loved that. And the reason I wanted to do this podcast and this episode is because after listening to Sophie, I got a lot of comments like, you're doing such a great job, Mama. She's such a good girl, all these things. And I want to step back and say, I do not take credit, nor do I take the blame if my kids make mistakes or don't make mistakes or are successful to the human eye, or because we put a lot of weight on those things and they're measured by human hand. So what success looks like, what failure looks like, and I think it's really important that we don't get too personalized in our children's development as far as their mistakes or their shortcomings. We talked about this, their grades, their mistakes, because if we're doing this properly, and this doesn't mean, again, that I have this figured out, but I have come to some deeper understandings, and I'm lucky because I have a really big age gap. So I have a 23, an 18, and a 13-year-old. So I've had time to reflect how I would do it if I had a second chance. The first kid, I think I tried to control up until as long as I could. And she didn't really need that much controlling. But I wanted to dictate everything. Like I remember her asking if she could go to a party, or not a party, a concert in Detroit when she was a senior. And I was like, of course not. You can't go to a concert in Detroit and drive there. And like people will probably be smoking and drinking and like, no, why would you even ask that? And my husband was like, well, in like 4 months, she's going to be moving away and going to Chicago to go to college. And I was like super mad that he said that to me. Like, and what's your point? And I think that that's something that maybe we haven't learned enough on the parenting rope, is that it is our job, you guys, and our job and our privilege to allow mistakes to happen. And this is where I think we fail in the American parenting realm, and where I have made a lot of mistakes. We are supposed to be raising them to leave. So we're supposed to be shifting it from being about us to literally just being a guide for them. Every day they're getting older and moving towards being away from us. From the minute that they're born, A, they're never ours to start with, and B, they're transitioning away from us. And we've come to this place. There's a book called The Coddling of the American Mind. You should read it. But we're coming to this place where that line is blurred. And so for me, not giving Sydney, she had shown herself very responsible. I mean, she was a great kid. She was doing, she wasn't getting into trouble. So she had shown herself trustworthy to make a choice like that. And the fact that I didn't want her to go was about me and not really about what she had shown up as. And the truth of giving them those opportunities from very young to make decisions that might not be what we would want, but give them an opportunity to try, to fail, to succeed, to struggle. And then our job, and I didn't really get this, is to be a place that they can come when they don't meet the expectation of us, others, or themselves, and we can have a conversation. Not a battle, not a fight. But I grew up, and I didn't really understand that. I was kind of running a dictatorship where I told people what to do, and because I'm the leader, they better listen. And so the first round there was that, and so this is our luxury as parents, you guys, is that hopefully, if you're listening and you haven't done this, you have time. Like I'm still learning, and my oldest is 23. I really am, and still learning with Sophie, and struggling with this. She just left for her first of her adventures on Saturday, so she's gone for a month, and that's the longest she's been away. And so now I have two kids not in my home, and I really, really, really take this super seriously now, because when we over micromanage our kids and then they go into adulthood, they don't come back around to us because they don't want us. They don't think that we're a place that they can be themselves, or B, they show up as the person that they think that we want them to be. So we never get to truly know our kids. And they're looking to others for advice and opportunities instead of coming to us. And so I really want to have the opportunity to walk with my kids into adulthood, because you guys, 18 years is all that they're kids. And if God willing, we might have 40 or 50 or 60 years with them as adults. And so the foundation that we lay for how they get to move into adulthood with us, I think, is through trusting that the experiences that we give them when they're young allow us to be the privilege to enter adulthood with them. So my therapist also told me at that same meeting that it's important that we wrestle with our kids, because he said as they get older, about middle school, high school, they are the rocket and we are the launch pad. He said, so as they're getting ready to blast off into adulthood, the fire is coming out of the bottom of them, and that starts to burn up the foundation. And he said it needs to create a little bit of friction to get off the ground. And if we're not allowing that little bit of friction, we're going to have failure to launch. We're going to have kids that, in their 20s that, and I'm not saying they have to know what they're doing, but they're too afraid to even take a risk, that they're not leaving our house at all, that they're not seeking other opportunities, or they've left, but they're not, they're too afraid to do any of the things that they think about. And so that picture of the rocket ship and that I'm doing it right if there's a little friction and a little bit of blast off. So I think that that's a great picture, you guys. So remember, no matter where you're at, it's not too late. I'm learning this in real time with my 23, 18, and 13-year-old, that I really am trying to create space. So I'll give a different story because I think this one's fun. I hope I haven't shared it on here before. But when we were raising Sydney, I really came into my faith, and I became a pretty serious Christian homeschool mom. I homeschooled my kids for 5 years, from the time Sydney was in 4th grade until she was in high school. So Sophie would have been all the way preschool to 4th grade. And Sadie was just a baby, so she doesn't really remember it. But in that season of life, I canceled all the television, and you have to ask Sydney about this sometime if you know her. And we only had Little House on the Prairie DVDs and The Cosby Show. And that was all my kids could watch. And we didn't watch much TV. And it was super fun. And when they did, listen, what we watch influences how we act. I believe that. So if you only watch Little House on the Prairie, you're going to be super nice, because those kids were super nice. And I look back now, I'm like, that was pretty super weird that I did that. But it was an interesting time. And as Sydney was growing up and got into high school, the way she showed up was different because of her homeschooling background. And when she would ask me to go to an R-rated movie or go to someone's house and they were doing something, I would, and this is a true story, and I'm sorry about it. I would make her look up the Plugged In Movie Review, which is a Christian thing. And I'm not saying if you do this, it's wrong. I'm just telling you where I'm at in parenting. And that doesn't mean I'm right. And it doesn't mean you're wrong if you're doing it differently. I'm just trying to give us different perspectives because I don't think they're wrong. I think Sydney had a great upbringing and a great childhood. But and then I would ask her what God would think about her going to see that. And, I think it created a lot of shame and guilt, which isn't actually the thought process I want her to have around faith or around choices she's making, because I'm an adult and I make lots of choices to watch lots of things and do things, and they're personal choices, and the Lord would have to convict me if they were wrong. But I think creating that made a line for Sydney that she felt like she could cross, but she couldn't tell me, and that maybe it created space between her and God instead of it being a safe space for her. And so she didn't go watch certain things with her friends and couldn't go, and I think it separated Sydney a little bit from the actual things I wanted her to be close to. And then we kind of melted a little bit towards the middle, but here we are with kid number 3. And I think it's super funny. So she asked to go see a spooky movie with all of her 13-year-old friends. And I don't watch spooky movies. And what I said to Sadie when she asked to go see that, I said, well, I'm going to tell you for myself, the Bible says what we put in our eyes and ears, and it fills up our heart and it becomes the overflow. And I said, I don't like spooky things because I don't like to be spooked out. But if you want to go see it, if it's something you want to do, you let me know. I'll drop you off. But I definitely wouldn't go see that movie. And she said, fine, great. No, I want to go. Didn't have to think twice about it. Didn't care about my opinion. And so I dropped her off with her friends. And that night when she came home, you guys, she probably hate me for saying this, but hopefully none of you are listening that know her. She was terrified, and she never wanted to go see a scary movie again. And she slept in my bed for the first time since she was like 7, and she was 13. And it was this beautiful moment for me where I realized that giving her the choice and then making space for her to come to me, she came home that night and she said, I don't want to talk about it. I didn't like the movie and I'm sleeping in here and I don't want you to say anything. And I just smiled because I was like, oh my God, this is how it's supposed to go. So she laid in the safety of my home. She knew she could come to me. And the next time her friends asked if she wanted to go to a scary movie, she said no because she didn't want to. And it creates these spaces for where if Sydney would have done it, she wouldn't have been able to come to me because she would have probably been grounded for lying. And I would have shamed her and made her feel bad. And that would have created more space between her and I, and also her and God, whatever that looks like. And so I think understanding these things about what is our goal as a parent? Is it to punish our kids? And I'll give you another example that I think is a really good one. So Sydney and I used to butt heads all the time. And one time I was calling her to come downstairs. I'm like, Sydney, come here. And she didn't respond. And I was getting so mad. And she didn't listen to me. And so I went upstairs and I'm like, why didn't you come downstairs when I asked you to come downstairs? And she said, because I was in the middle of something. And I'm like, well, you need to listen when I tell you to do something. And I told you to come down here. And so it turned into a huge fight, both of us. And when I went to my therapist, I was telling him about it. And I'm like, can you believe that? Because she never listens to me when I tell her to do something. And he said, well, what were you doing? And I said, well, what do you mean? And he said, well, what were you doing? Why didn't you just go upstairs if you knew she was like in the middle of her homework or she was doing something? Why didn't you just go upstairs and talk to her upstairs? Because it seems like you missed the whole point of what you were trying to do because you were mad that she didn't listen. I'm like, yeah, but shouldn't she be in trouble because she didn't listen to me? He said, well, I'm going to go back to the question. What were you doing that you couldn't just go up to her? Would the conversation have gone differently had you had just went up to her room? And I was really kind of, again, upset. I don't like to be, clearly there's a correlation between me being confronted, but I usually come back around and I was like, well, yeah, I guess I could have, but he said, because the issue became about her not listening to you. So you never got to talk to her about the point, and you made space where you're both fighting. And I lost my temper, of course, because she wouldn't do what I said. And she lost her temper because I was crazy. And we never got to have the conversation. And so if you were like me and you believe that your kid should just listen to you and you get mad when they don't, I'm going to ask the question, is there ever a time where you could meet your kid where they're at instead of always expecting, because you're the adult, that they have to come to you, whether that's proximity or emotionally? And I've been guilty of that. And again, it's not right or wrong because it was the way we were raised, I think. But there is a space where, what if I would have went up there, knocked on her door? He said, "Are you busy?" And if she would have said, "Yeah, I'm doing homework," and I could have been like, "Oh, well, is this a good time? I have to ask you something." And if she said, "No, not right now," I said, "Well, could we circle back around to it when it's a good time?" So different, but it's intentional, you guys. And it's not how we think. I mean, our natural tendency is, I was in the middle of making dinners. "Hey, Sid, come here." She didn't listen. "Hey, Sid, come here." By the third time, now I'm angry. And then I'm like, "You never listened to me." And I'm raging. And I forgot what the point even was. And the point for me is that I'm creating a bridge between my young adolescent children to their adult versions, and a space for me to walk across and a space for them to walk across. And I think that that's super important and such a valuable treasure. And again, I'm not figuring this out. Sophie left this last week, and the day before she left, even after we did 2 episodes of the podcast about hearing each other and listening to each other and trusting God's plan and one day at a time and all the crap we talked about, that I tell you guys we talked about, she came to my room and said that she thought that she didn't really know what she wanted to do still when she got home from her 3-month hiatus, and she might just get a job and take some more time. And I lost it. Not like screaming lost it, but lost it like wanting to know the plan. Well, what do you mean? You can't just take a break, that because then I'm like, you're going to be floundering. And if you flounder, then you're going to do this. And she said, "Mom, I don't want to just jump into something. I need you to listen to me. I don't know what I want to do." And I was terrified that I'm a 26-year-old living at home. And anyways, I was way out ahead of it. And eventually her body language changed, and she said, "You know what, Ma, I'll do whatever you want me to do," because that's her personality, right? She's the peacemaker. We talked about that. And because I know her well, because of all the things we've talked about, and I know myself well, and I know the Lord well, when her body language changed, I recognized very quickly that I was in the wrong. I'm not trusting. I'm pushing her away. Do I want her to do what I want? Or do I want to know my kids, and do I want my kids to know themselves, so that when they're making decisions, they're not afraid to fail. They're not afraid to make mistakes, because I'm 43 and I still don't always know exactly what I'm going to do, you guys. I'm changing my mind all the time. And we want to make space for our kids to change their mind. And so this is just such a beautiful idea, that we can't take all the credit and we can't take all the blame. You know, my kids are all smart as a whip. I got one more story and then we're going to close up for the day. When I homeschooled, my kids all went back to school. I got a lot of compliments because Sydney is exceptionally smart. And they're always like, "Oh, it must have been the homeschooling." And when I was homeschooling them, Sydney walked through the room one day and I was doing English with Sophie. And I was like, "Sophie, this is a hyperbole." And Sydney's like, "Mom, you mean hyperbole?" And I was like, "No, Sydney, that's a different word. This is hyperbole, Hypeer. I spelled it all. She's like, "Yeah, it's a hyperbole." She was in 7th grade. And I was like, "Okay," and whatever. No, it's not. So again, this idea that I don't like being challenged, it was hyperbole, you guys. So in spite of you and because of you, you can teach your kids all the wrong things, and they're going to turn out just fine as long as you love them, You say you're sorry when you do wrong, and you're working really hard to see them. And this can transfer over into so many areas of your life. So thanks for tuning in today, you guys, as we talked about parenting, continuing to see yourself and see others. And I hope this helped you to just make a new plank on your bridge as we walk closer to others. I guess this is where I ask you to subscribe to my channel, to follow me on social, and to listen wherever podcasts can be found. And join me every Tuesday at 2 as we unpack how to heal your hair, your heart, and your happiness.